So today is going to be actually a webtoon review. My name is Taylor Rose and welcome back to my channel where we talk about everything reading and writing. When I lived in Japan, it was harder for me to get books in English. So during that time, I became obsessed with webtoons, webcomics. I personally consider them reading. My husband doesn't. He makes fun of me all the time for being way too invested, but this particular comic has haunted me ever since I read it. You might have seen going around book talk, people talking about bring back the yearning. And to me, I don't know, something about this story just like really encapsulates what I think of when I hear the word yearning. As a disclaimer, this video is just my opinion. You might hate this comic. I think it's really amazing and worth the read. I will be doing all the plot points, so this is your spoiler warning. However, that being said, I do think that experiencing a book or a comic yourself, even if you've already heard a summary of what was going on, is still worthwhile. As for content warnings, this comic is not explicit really, but it does address some sensitive topics. After the summary, we're going to talk more about my feelings. So let's get into it. So we're going to be talking about Your Eternal Lies. It was originally a web novel, but was made into a web comic. It is currently hosted on Manta. Here's all the info for you, including the original author as well as the artist. So this comic follows Rosen Walker, who is an inmate being transferred to a new prison, and Ian Connor, an ex-pilot who is in charge of transporting her. So we start off on a prison ship bound for the dreaded Isle of Monte, where Ian Connor interrogates Rosen Walker, a prisoner infamous for her escapes and alleged cons. Though branded a liar, Rosen insists she has never told a lie, dismissing Ian's questions with flippant remarks. When pressed about her identity, she reluctantly reveals her legal name is actually Rosen Howers. Ian begins reviewing her file, and we learn that Rosen was sentenced to 50 years in prison at the age 17. She escaped a women's prison after a year, was shortly thereafter recaptured, given an extra 25 years on top of her sentence, and then transferred to maximum security, only to escape again 5 years later with nothing but a spoon. Then we cut to Rosen reflecting on who Ian is. He is a celebrated war hero whose good looks and charisma made him an icon in their country's propaganda during the most recent war. Ian interrupts Rosen's kind of reverie by demanding to know what her crime was. Rosen maintains her innocence, but before she can explain further, a young man named Henry Vaville bursts into the room. Henry is super upset to find Ian interrogating Rosen, whom he immediately calls the Witch of Alcapez. And Henry quickly spells out Rosen's crime. She stabbed her husband, Henley Howers, to death, but she tearfully insists that she's innocent and claims that jealousy and lack of a proper investigation is what actually sealed her fate. Ian remains unconvinced, insisting that all the evidence condemns her. She did it. She did it. As Henry escorts Rosen back to her cell, she notes that Ian and Henry treat her a lot more humanely than past guards. Despite that, she is still determined to escape. The ship that they are on was previously a wartime supply vessel, but in the last year with the war ending, it has now been repurposed as kind of like a cruise ship. Ian presses Rosen about how she escaped. Did she use magic? What did she do? Is she really a witch? And Rosen denies this, saying if she were a witch, she never would have been captured in the first place. Ian lays out the facts. Rosen's a convicted felon. He has been personally ordered to escort her to the Isle of Monte, and no one has ever escaped the island. To drive home the impossibility of her escape, he chucks a platter of raw meat into the ocean, which reveals ravenous sea monsters filling the water. So of course, you know, the implication being, even if you get off this ship, you're just going to be torn apart. So we flash forward to Rosen back in her cell, where she is united with Maria, an inmate also from Alcapez. So they're old friends. Maria was kind of queen of the prison, essentially, and took Rosen under her wing and actually helped her escape. Maria teases Rosen about how handsome Yearn is and suggests seducing him, but Rosen kind of blows her off and says, this guy will never fall for that. Maria asks Rosen, why would Yearn even be assigned to you? Like, is he sick after the war? Like, there's no other reason a war hero like him would be assigned to transport someone like you. So Maria changes tactics and says, well, the next best thing is getting his pity. Their banter is interrupted by Lila Reveal, Henry's curious young niece, who has somehow broken her way into the prison hold. Rosen quickly charms the child with a coin trick while slyly fishing for information about Yearn. Afterwards, Maria, having seen the little magic trick, suggests Rosen could flee to Valpurgis, the island of witches. But Rosen scoffs at the idea because obviously she is not a witch. She'd never be able to get there. We cut to on the deck where Yearn and Henry are reflecting on the war. They're kind of astonished that they're even on this ship to begin with, kind of speculating that these civilians are so bored without like the quote unquote excitement of the war that they're now choosing to sail monster-infested waters for fun. Henry points out that Henry, Yearn, and Rosen are all from the same hometown, a city called Ryerton, which was destroyed during the war. And he bitterly notes that Rosen only survived the destruction of Ryerton because she managed to escape prison. Meanwhile, his sister, Lila's mother, an innocent, good person, was killed during the bombing. He speculates that Yearn was only assigned to transfer Rosen because of this. And, it's kind of hinted that Yearn is responsible for this bombing that occurred. Over the next several days, Yearn continues to interrogate Rosen, calling her reckless for escaping instead of bargaining for a lighter sentence or something. But Rosen counters that she would have died in Ryerton if she had done that. She also points out that that's kind of a pipe dream because regularly in their society, women receive much harsher sentences than men for the same crimes. Rosen, after killing her husband, was sentenced to 50 years in prison, the maximum sentence, whereas her neighbor, a man who killed his wife, was only sentenced to 8, the minimum sentence. She insists that both she and Yearn are idiots and heroes, and accuses the emperor of losing the war in everything but name. The countryside was destroyed, all of these young soldiers fought to the death. They won, and everything's still just as bad. Nothing changed, nothing improved for people, other than now the emperor gets to brag about winning. Yearn admits, yeah, you're right, but you can't insult the soldiers who died to protect people like you. Henry escorts Rosen back to her cell at this point, and on the way there, they've come across Lila, who starts choking on a piece of candy. Paralyzed by his PTSD from the war, Henry cannot act. He freezes. But Rosen begs him, uncuff me and I will save her. So he manages to uncuff Rosen, and she saves Lila's life by performing the Heimlich maneuver. Yearn arrives mid-chaos, and Rosen, thinking she's still talking to Henry, jokingly says, oh, well, what's my reward? Can I get a bath and a meal? And Yearn promises, yeah, for your good deed, I'll make sure that you get those things that you want. But the captain, revealed as Alex Reveal, Henry's father and an even greater war hero than Yearn, appears and overrides him, inviting Rosen to a family dinner party. Yearn is really reluctant about this, but Rosen accepts just to needle him, and just kind of reflecting on how he is nothing actually like the wartime propaganda broadcasts she was enamored with and gave her hope to survive. So we cut to Rosen, who is being bathed by some maids when Henry barges in under the pretense of guarding her. He claims Yearn sent him to watch over the criminal, and he sends all the maids out. Rosen immediately calls his bluff. Ian Connor is not the type of man to send a soldier into a naked woman's room. Henry admits, yeah, I'm not here on his orders. Henry confesses his resentment towards Rosen. During the war, bombers from the enemy country split their attack between the capital city and Ryerton. And so the military was faced with a tough choice. They couldn't split up themselves, so they had to protect one or the other. And Yearn made the call to protect the capital. This led to Ryerton being completely destroyed. Nobody in that city survived. Everyone died because the bombing was so intense. And he admits, like, he hates Rosen because she is Ryerton's most infamous criminal, and she is the only person to have made it out alive. He softens now that, she's shown to at least have some good in her. And he apologizes for the sea monster scare tactic with the meat earlier, because that was his idea. And he thanks Rosen for saving his niece's life. Back in his quarters, Ian is going through some of his paperwork, and he discovers a discarded notebook filled with clippings about Rosen. It's just pages and pages of newspaper clippings and photos of Rosen throughout the years. This reveals that, like, he has obsessively been following her ever since the bombing. It's really clear that this is a way for him to kind of redirect his guilt. Instead of having everyone in Ryerton killed, he managed, like, to save one person. One person from Ryerton lived. Lila enters to ask Ian to pick a gift for Rosen, saying that, like, well, you know her the best. And Ian's kind of like, wait a minute, what do you mean? Why do you think I know her? And Lila points out, oh, well, everyone's been following the Rosen story, but your newspapers always have the stories clipped out. So I thought that notebook was yours and I brought it back to you. And Ian is like, okay, don't tell anybody that you ever saw this. So Lila promises, and then she gives him Rosen's lucky coin. So this is the coin from the magic trick at the beginning of the comic. Lila casually mentions that Henry has gone to see Rosen, and Ian, remembering Rosen's earlier comments about abusive guards, storms out. He rushes to Rosen's suite, barges in on Rosen asking Henry for a favor, and he throws Henry out and immediately demands that Rosen tell him if Henry had assaulted her. Rosen's kind of bewildered by this, given who Henry is. And she insists, like, nothing happened. He's not even my type. I only go after the guards who get me stuff, as a joke. And Ian calls her a terrible liar, but Rosen counters, it doesn't actually matter whether or not I'm good at lying. People believe lies when they want a scapegoat. So everyone gets ready and they go meet up for the captain's dinner party. And Ian pointedly forbids Henry and Lila from getting too close to Rosen, saying they have to stand a meter away, and insisting he'll handle everything with Rosen himself. Because she is handcuffed, he offers to assist her with the meal, so, like, cutting up her food and feeding her. Stop! And she gets really flustered by this because she, just keeps thinking, like, I was obsessed with this dude on the radio, and here he is, like, hand feeding me steak. Henry criticizes Rosen for her poor etiquette, which obviously is a sore spot, but Ian quickly jumps to her defense, and, there's all this, like, cute, like, playful banter. Their conversation touches on Rosen's medical knowledge, like, how was she able to save Lila? And she says that, her late husband was a doctor. Awkward. And she reveals that she was an orphan. She never had parents, and she was married off to him at 15 years old. Everyone is shocked by this, but she kind of is like, yeah, this is the real world, guys. The evening then takes a dire turn as Rosen, after tasting one of the fruit dishes on the table, coughs up blood and collapses. So a doctor's called, and he examines Rosen and states that her collapse was likely due to a food allergy, hinting that it may have actually been a suicide attempt if she knew of the allergy beforehand. She's expected to survive, but her health is really fragile after these years in prison. So Lila pleads, like, please don't send Rosen back to her cell or she'll die. And so Ian immediately is like, hey, take her to my room, which kind of everyone's like, whoa, what? But he ignores them. So Rosen wakes up in Ian's quarters and, is pretty disoriented. But she realizes that the captain is sitting there waiting for her to awake. And he tells her that, hey, we have 3 days until we reach the Isle of Monte. Then he answers some questions about Ian. He reveals that Ian is also an orphan, though he did lose his parents later in childhood. And the captain talks about how Ian is this, like, really outwardly stoic person, but inside, he's secretly sentimental. Many of the objects around the room that he points out, such as a map and a special lantern that never goes out, were gifts from the captain to Ian. Before the captain leaves, he urges Rosen not to attempt suicide again, saying that she reminds him of his daughter. After he leaves, she realizes that he was hinting at possible escape routes for her. She kind of reflects on how she once sacrificed herself so that Emily, a close friend of hers, could escape after Hindley's murder. And Rosen, she's galvanized. She's like, I'm not doing that again. I'm going to escape. Yearn returns to the room and accuses Rosen of trying to kill herself. She initially denies it, but seeing how upset she is, she decides to kind of twist the knife, so to speak, and starts crying, lamenting, like, of course I would do that. Like, my future sucks. I'm going to this island to die. And they have this back and forth where she suggests a way to kill herself, and Yearn retorts how he would stop her. Which on one hand, that's kind of like really morbid, but on the other hand, I don't know. It got me. Yearn asks Rosen, why are you giving up now? You have spent years trying to escape, fighting, protesting your innocence. You're not the type to give up. What's going on? This infuriates Rosen. How does he know who she is? And so he retracts his statement and just says, at the very least, I know you better than the other people here. In exchange for Rosen staying alive and not attempting anything, he will allow her to remain uncuffed, unchained within his cabin. And Rosen agrees, obviously for nefarious reasons. That night, Rosen keeps trying to pry information from Yearn, criticizing how different he is from the idealized version of himself in the broadcasts. Rosen asks, like, hey, since we're celebrating the end of my life, can you give me cigarettes and some booze? So he gives her a cigarette for now, and he kind of tries to convince her, like, you need to go to bed now. Like, stop talking to me. But she refuses to sleep until she tells Yearn her side of her story, because no one has ever asked her before. So Rosen recounts her childhood in the orphanage where she was mistreated and overworked. One night, while doing chores, she glimpsed through a window a family celebrating St. Valberg's Day, and that was the first time she'd ever heard of it, despite it being like a cultural staple, which is like points out how isolated and abused these poor kids were. But seeing them celebrating, she witnesses like their warmth and love of a family for the first time, and she prays to St. Valberg for someone to care for her. Because she is shortly thereafter turning 15 when orphans are expelled, either to go work as laborers or to be married off, she was unexpectedly chosen by Hindley Howers, who buys her as his wife. He's a seemingly kind man who gives her a gift at their first meeting. You know, her first thought is, oh, my prayer's been answered. So initially, you know, Hindley keeps up this front of being very kind, but quickly thereafter, it's like a switch is flipped and he becomes very critical of her. Afraid for her safety, she works desperately to meet his demands, but he's never really happy. He just becomes increasingly more aggressive each time she makes a mistake or doesn't meet expectations that he hasn't even told her about. After a few months, there is a surprise visitor. Hindley's daughter, Emily, appears. And initially, they intensely dislike each other. Emily is upset that there's a woman who's taken her mother's place while her mother is languishing away sick in another home. And Rosen is afraid that Emily will make Hindley angrier, more aggressive towards her as a consequence. However, they quickly warm up to each other after they realize they're on the same side. They both hate Hindley and they're both victims. This is around the time that Yearn's broadcasts begin to air over the radio. So while Rosen is experiencing this like intense abuse from her husband, she's hearing this voice on the radio talking about how the military will protect them. Partway through her story, Rosen actually falls asleep. And so Yearn reflects on the fact that, you know, if anyone knew how obsessed he was with her, they never would have given him this job. Yearn wakes up to Henry very upset because he has fallen asleep in the bed with Rosen. And Henry becomes even more upset when Yearn refuses to chain her up. Yearn tells Henry, get to the point, and Henry reports that a massive school of sea creatures, so even more than previously, have migrated in front of the ship, which will interfere with their voyage. It's predicted to delay their arrival by several days. He also promises not to leave the two alone because he is suspicious AF, but Yearn tells him he's overreacting. You know, at this point, Rosen's woken up and she starts pressing Yearn about himself. And he reveals that he became a commander at 20 years of age, extremely young, because all the older commanders, when the war broke out, fled the country. Essentially, these students from the military academy were forced to immediately spearhead all of these battles and skirmishes. She apologizes at this point for insulting his comrades earlier and admits that Hindley, her husband, actually used to beat her because she collected Ian's flyers. And, you know, there's this like really tender moment where Rosen touches his face. Like, I looked at your face all the time on these flyers during the war. And Lila bursts into the room, interrupting them. Overjoyed that Rosen has recovered, Lila invites her to the St. Valberg's Day party on the deck. And Rosen, seeing this as a chance to scout out the lifeboats and maybe find the key for the lifeboat motor, wants to accept. Henry and Lila argue over this, but eventually Ian makes the decision. He asks Rosen, "Do you want to go?" And she says, "Of course." So Rosen starts reflecting on her second St. Valberg's Day. Her relationship at this point with Emily had grown a lot stronger, and Emily was teaching her simple math, how to count money, basic medicines, as well as about witches, because Emily is a witch. She says it takes the blood of one person, one wish, and one piece of magic. But Emily kind of suggests that witches are made unknowingly all the time, so this is just kind of like a fairy tale. You know, this is when Rosen realizes that St. Valberg did grant her wish by sending her Emily, someone to care for her and protect her to their best ability despite Henley's abuse. But unfortunately, soon after this, Rosen's period, her menstrual cycle, has stopped. We cut back to the current day, and as Rosen prepares for the ball, she tries on several dresses. Ian's in the room still, and he notices as she's trying on these dresses that her body is covered in scars. She reveals that Hindley beat her almost every single day. Ian asks, like, why didn't you testify about this? Like, why didn't you talk about his abuse in court? And he like realizes, like, the media never talked about Hindley. Like, it only ever spoke about Hindley as Rosen's victim. But Rosen says it wouldn't have changed anything. They had already decided against her. She asks Ian which dress he would prefer. There's a blue, a red, and a yellow. And he says the yellow because the blue is like the sky and the red is like blood. And I just, like, that made me tear up. Rosen, being herself, is like, then I'll wear the blue one. Unfortunately, the neckline does reveal a lot of her scarring. So she starts to change into the yellow dress, saying, "No lady looks like me. Your dress was a better choice." But Ian stops her and, using his like Medal of Honor, essentially, pins a shawl around Rosen's shoulders. Which Rosen's kind of like, whoa, I'm a criminal. Like, I shouldn't be wearing this pin. He's like, it's fine. I don't even like the pin. On the way to the ball, Ian and Rosen meet up with Henry and Lila. It is revealed that this is a masquerade, but Henry will not wear a mask because of his experiences as a fighter pilot and the effect it had on his vision. So, you know, having his vision limited in any way gives him like PTSD flashbacks. And Rosen asks Ian, like, oh, is that why you're also avoiding a mask? But Henry quickly interrupts and says, Ian would never be sick like him because Ian is a real hero. So they go on to the ball, and Ian brings Rosen a plate of food and some wine, but he refuses to drink it all himself. You know, he's very scrupulous. He will not drink on the job. So Rosen's upset because she was hoping to get him drunk enough that she would be able to scope things out without him being suspicious. She asks, kind of jokingly, because she's upset, oh, is there any Mayra wine, which is made from that fruit she's allergic to? And Ian tells her there is none. If you want some, you'll have to go to the bottom of the ocean because I threw it all overboard. There's no wine, there's no jam, there's no fruit. All of it's gone. Guys, Rosen quickly becomes tipsy from the wine, and Ian asks her suddenly, how did she kill Hindley? And she challenges him, noting that he's never as kind as he is on the radio, and demands his autograph. She's like, sign my hand. I'll look at it as I die. And Ian signs her palm, but she looks at it and she's immediately furious because that isn't his name. He didn't write his name. So she starts yelling at him. I don't know how to read, but I know how to read your name. That's the only word I know. And so she writes his name on his hand, and he reveals, oh, I wrote your name on your hand. And he wrote Rosen Walker. So this whole time, he's been calling her Rosen Howers. But after learning about how Hindley treated her, he goes back to the name that she wants to be called by, which right? So this is the first time he's ever used her real name. She offers like, I'll wash your hand off. My handwriting's horrible, but he refuses. He keeps it on his hand. So they move to the dance floor and Rosen shares more about Emily because Ian asks, you keep talking about this Emily girl, but you've been alone ever since Hindley's murder. Why didn't she help you? Why didn't you talk about her during the case? And so Rosen's pissed. She's like, Emily isn't involved in any of this. How dare you even suggest that? At this point, a wave hits the ship, so Rosen is knocked into Ian's arms. And she seizes the moment to try and unsettle him by hugging him and asking if the soldiers were ever given sleeping drugs strong enough to kill, which hints again at her committing suicide. Ian refuses and says, no, we weren't. And he tells Rosen, like, you keep talking about how people hate you, but I've never hated you. I haven't hated you this whole time. At this point, Rosen kind of notices all these other women looking at them, and she teases Ian about his relationships. Like, you're not married? Is there a girl back home? Like, do you like the brunette or the blonde? And during this conversation, she realizes like, oh, Ian's never been in a relationship. He has zero experience. Again, trying to like unsettle him, she suggests that they sleep together. But Ian immediately declines and he's like, you're really drunk now. Let's just go back to the cabin. Like, you can't be out in public at this point. But Rosen convinces him to stop at a bench. And this is where she gets her first clear look at the lifeboats. So she's secretly scoping things out when a really drunken man approaches Rosen and starts harassing her about who is she. It's revealed that this man is named Joshua Gregory, and him and Ian clearly have a bad past. They do not get along. So Joshua just keeps pestering them like, who are you? Who's this girl? I've never seen you with the girl before, Ian. And he like grabs Rosen to try and take her away to dance, but Ian intervenes, pulling Rosen away. And Joshua goes off on this rant like Ian has always hated him because Joshua ran away. He fled during a battle and saved his own life. Meanwhile, all of their comrades died. And he just keeps going on, insulting Ian, insulting their comrades, insults Henry. And then he tries to grab Rosen's mask off of her face. So Ian just like punches him straight in the nose and they flee as Joshua is screaming at them. And Joshua says, like, we're both cowards. I ran to save my own life, but you let everyone in your hometown die and don't want to acknowledge it. So they make it to a different part of the deck and decide to wait for the fireworks show. And Rosen teases that Joshua is just jealous of Ian because everyone loves Ian, unlike her. Ian continues his argument from earlier, stating that like, some people do like you. I like you. And he gives her his coat as the show starts. This is the first time Rosen has seen fireworks, so she's like so enamored by how beautiful it is. But then she looks over and notices that Ian is having a full-blown panic attack. She wants to go get help to find a doctor or find Henry, but Ian insists she keep it a secret. She can't tell anyone that he is like this. So she offers, well, tell me where your medicine is. You should have medicine for this. Let me go get it for you. And instead of responding to this question, he just asks if she's disappointed. Like this decorated war hero who everyone looked up to as a paragon of strength and stability is actually a wreck. He's broken. And he confesses that like, you, Rosen, are the only person that I ever saved in the war. Like everyone else I went to war for is gone. And so at this point, he's calmed down a little bit and he tells her where to find his medicine. So Rosen runs back to his cabin and she goes and finds the drawer he described, and there's a single dose of the sedative. She decides that she's going to look around to see if there's any more of this, because like there's no way he just has one packet. And she comes across his scrapbook with all the articles about her, but she doesn't realize it's about her until she's like looking at all of the words that he circled, and he circled her name each time. And then she looks at her hand and realizes these are about me. So she's like confirming for the first time that like, oh, he does know me. Like he knows everything. And she's torn between stealing more medicine in order to drug the entire ship, basically. And then her growing feelings for Ian, because she knows if she escapes under his watch, he will be seriously punished for this. But well, she decides like she cannot rely on him. If she leaves, like eventually he'll forgive her. He will recover, and he has other people like Henry worth protecting who will support him. So she steels herself to prioritize her escape over these feelings that are developing. Back on deck, Yearn is alone and he's spiraling with regret, just kind of replaying all of his conversations with Rosen. Is she using this time to run away? I told her where the drugs are. Is she taking the drugs to kill herself? Right? He's just like, I can't believe I'm even in this situation. Then Rosen pops back up with his meds, and seeing her, he realizes like he wouldn't change anything. Unlike the war, this is something he chose to do. Like he chose Rosen Walker. Overcome by this realization, he kisses her, but immediately regrets it. He's like, that was a mistake. I'm so sorry. Takes her back to the cabin, and Rosen kind of teases him like, oh, well, that kiss was so innocent. Like, do you want me to teach you how to really kiss? And Yearn offers like, I am so sorry. What I did was completely out of line. You can slap me. I don't know what came over me. And instead of slapping him, Rosen pulls him in for a deeper kiss and declares, well, now we're even. So they're back in the cabin, and Rosen attempts seducing him again because she knows like he's never going to drink this drugged wine. So I need to do something to incapacitate this guy. But Yearn refuses her advances, and Rosen is, she's feeling pretty desperate at this point. So she just keeps pressing and pressing and pressing until finally he kind of snaps. He like glares at her in anger for the first time. And she is frightened by this, obviously given her past. And, he apologizes immediately. Like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. And he lets her sit in his lap, and he just asks like, why are you trying to sleep with me? What's in it for you? What are you getting out of this? And she kind of jokes around like, well, I'll never have the chance to sleep with someone as handsome as you ever again. He just still doesn't understand. He's just like, do you like it that much? And she's like, no, actually, it's always been horrible. I just want to try it with you. Now she's kind of like, am I gross? Like, you don't want to sleep with me because I'm a prisoner? I'm disgusting. And he's like, no, like if things were different, maybe we would. But right now you're injured. You're malnourished. You're on the verge of death almost. And you're too used to people treating you badly. I don't want to be one of those people like that in your life. And so as a surprise, he brings out a piece of the strawberry shortcake that they eat on St. Valberg's Day and tells her to make a wish. So she blows out the candle and wishes to St. Valberg inside her head, right, for strength to face the world alone. She asks Yearn if he also made a wish, but he just says, just tell me more about yourself and don't lie to me. So Rosen continues her story back up from the point her period stopped. She realized she was pregnant with Hindley's child. She tries to hang herself out of desperation, but Emily stops her and, tells her like, we can abort the pregnancy. Like, none of this is worth you dying. We will figure something out. But Rosen just is like, Hindley's just going to get me pregnant again and again and again. We can't do this forever. Please, like, let's run away together. And Emily agrees, but they need to save up money before they do so. Eventually, they've finally saved up enough money to escape, but Hindley catches them. He realizes what's been going on and he beats Emily very badly. So Rosen ran for help, but when she finds neighbors to help her, they just dismiss it. Like, these are family affairs. We're not going to get involved. And one of them even tries to assault her, forcing her to run away. Yearn, listening to her talk about this, immediately condemns the neighbor's behavior, saying if he were there, he would have executed men like that on the spot. So Rosen asks him like, well, if you were there, would you have killed Hindley if you knew he was beating us? And he's like, of course, without a second of doubt. It just, my heart, hearing this, Rosen immediately thinks like, I've got him right where I want him. Which kind of, Rosen, but you get it. Rosen finally falls asleep and Yearn starts struggling inside his own head. He can't let her die at sea, right? If she escapes to sea, she'll be eaten by sea monsters. He can't grant her a merciful death. Like, he can't see her die in front of him, but then he also can't abandon her to the Isle of Monte. If she gets to the prison, she's going to die. And so while he's thinking about this, Henry enters and basically just confronts him like, look, I've seen the signs. You're in love with her. Why would you do this? Like, what a dumb decision, dude. You spent 10 years at war watching everyone you loved. All of our friends died. And now you're giving up this peace you finally won to fall for this murderous convict. What? Henry pulls out his gun and aims it at Rosen and is like, well, can you kill her to spare her from this horrible death we're taking her to? And Yearn knocks it away and is just like, stop. So Henry then informs Yearn that the reason he came down in the first place is that the ship has actually been stopped by the sea monsters that are gathering. They cannot continue sailing because these sea monsters are surrounding the ship. Because of this, the passengers on board have become increasingly frightened. They're terrified for their lives, and they are convinced, like, it's Rosen. You let this witch on board. That's why this is the first time in history that something like this has happened, and it's because of her. So Yearn orders Henry to take Rosen back down to the prison hold, and he will go confront the mob. As he's leaving his room, he notices that the lucky coin, which he left on his desk, actually turned gold, like Rosen had promised Lila. So we flash to the captain's room where the crew has gathered and they're arguing about what to do. One man suggests that they just throw Rosen overboard, it's not worth it. But the captain refuses, and Yearn brandishes his gun, warning that anyone who disobeys the captain will be immediately shot by him. They kind of erupt, accusing Yearn and the captain of being bewitched by Rosen. Then we cut to Henry down with Rosen in her cell, and he warns her when she wakes up about the chaos that's going on up above, that the passengers actually want to throw her overboard. Suddenly, Joshua and several men break into the prison hold and threaten Henry at gunpoint, cut the lock off the cell, and drag both of them up to the deck. Joshua starts inciting the crowd, blaming the witch for the ship's troubles, and Rosen's protests that, like, she's not a witch are just completely ignored. They have her up on the side, ready to push her into the sea, when Yearn bursts onto the deck shouting her name. Unfortunately, she's immediately shoved over, and she falls into the ocean, thinking, like, this is it, this is the end. She's fighting to stay afloat, but unfortunately begins to sink into the water when suddenly something lifts her back up to the surface. And when she hits the air, she sees that Yearn is right there beside her, and he tries to help calm her down, but everything fades to black. Next, Rosen awakes back in Yearn's cabin with Henry, who is trying to offer her water, but she refuses to drink anything because she has already drugged it. Henry explains that Yearn managed to save her, and she was brought back onto the ship, which confirms to Rosen that she didn't just have some sort of weird nightmare. Henry leaves to continue stalling the passengers from demanding Rosen be locked up in her cell, because at this point, she's freezing cold. So they know locking her back up in this cold jail cell at the bottom of the ship, it would be the death sentence for her. And Yearn asks Rosen, do you really want to live? Do you want to live? And she says, of course I do. Like, I've always wanted to live. And so Yearn, oh my God, it's the trope. Yearn tells her, like, take off your clothes. So they both strip naked and they are cuddled together in the bed for warmth. Oh my God. Despite being aware that, like, her chance to escape is closing, Rosen is exhausted and she ultimately falls asleep. She dreams about the day that she killed Hindley. This is when he finds her birth control stash, and so he beats Emily, clearly the one who made the birth control, within an inch of her life and throws her down in the cellar. He threatens Rosen and steps out. She realizes Yearn in the flyer will never protect her. So Henry comes down back to Yearn's cabin and delivers a message that they just received from the Imperial Navy. If the sea creatures do not depart by sundown, execute Rosen Walker immediately. Henry admits that it feels like all the good people died in the war, and only the bad people, including himself, are left. And he had no idea that Rosen was, like, so hated by the general public. Like, he had his personal reasons for hating her, but he didn't realize that there was so much hatred directed towards her. And he's like, I'm no better than Joshua. Like, I'm a piece of shit. To redeem himself, he agrees he will continue stalling for time in the hope that Rosen's fever will break in the interim. Yearn climbs back into bed with her, and she wakes up and warns him, like, if the people outside knew that their war hero Yearn was cuddled up with a witch, if they knew that he was helping her, you know, his reputation would be over. But he says he doesn't care. And she jokes, like, well, maybe you really are bewitched. He says, I've been bewitched for a long time, right? Ever since he first put her photo in his wallet. Like, that's the last thing that he had for himself to hold on to. Which, low-key, I'm like, Henry's your best friend, but that's fine. Rosen asks him if he will do his broadcast voice for her and tells him that, like, he has no idea how much she loved his voice during the war, what it meant to the people of Ryerton. And so he, like, talks her to sleep, basically, like, with his little propaganda script, and So Rosen falls back asleep, And this time, instead of having a dream of the past, she is in this dreamscape with Emily. And Emily tells her, you need to wake up in order to find me. And Rosin's just kind of like, I have no idea what's going on. Where? What do you mean? And Emily tells her, like, you told me to go to Valpurgis, like the Isle of Witches. If you wake up, you can come find me there. And Rosin cries, asking, like, did you know how hard my life has been without you? Like, why didn't you come back for me? And Emily tells her, like, unfortunately, like, witches have to find their own way to Valpurgis. They cannot be brought there by anyone else. And so Rosin wakes up and she's now in her cell with Maria, who tells her her plan worked. The ship is quiet. The people are drugged. The guards that are watching them have collapsed to the floor. And Maria also points out, like, there's this weird creature in the window who's been waiting for you to wake up. Rosin, like, looks at this lizard-like creature and is like, she connects the dots. Like, the sea creatures are here for me. They came to get me. That's the only reason they're here. Like, it really is my fault. She realizes, like, I don't know when, but I became a witch. And so she breaks her chains and she goes to free Maria, but Maria refuses to go with her, saying that she's going to be the queen of Monte, basically, and that Rosin deserves her freedom. And Henry arrives to take Rosin back to Yearn because he's been locked up for defending her. On the way, Henry starts realizing that, like, actually, I've been also drugged. How did that happen? And he has a tearful goodbye with Rosin and then passes out, right? She takes Henry's gun with her and starts making her escape. She runs up to the top deck and starts preparing the lifeboat when she senses someone behind her. So she pulls Henry's gun and whirls around, only to find herself looking at Yearn. She threatens to shoot him, but Yearn points out that Henry only ever carries blanks ever since the war. And so she tries to shoot him. Obviously, it doesn't work. And so she collapses on the deck. I can't believe this is it. He's going to take me back. But Yearn kneels in front of her, hands her his gun, and tells her this one's actually loaded. She's kind of like, what's going on? And he, like, has her point the gun in his head and says, like, this is the only way you will ever trust me. Like, I want you to trust me. And so she asks, how did he escape? And he admits, like, he agreed to throw her overboard. He was never actually locked up. And she connects the dots and realizes, like, oh, you drugged the people in the room with you by convincing them to drink wine. She's like, why are you doing any of this? Are you just doing this to get me to tell you the truth? Do you want to know the truth that badly? Are you even going to believe me if I tell you the truth? And he's like, none of it matters. Just tell me anyways. And so she finally admits she did actually murder Henley. So that last time when Henley almost beat Emily to death, Rosin decided enough is enough. No one's going to help us. We have to help ourselves. So she poisons Henley's food and then she stabs him to death. She goes down and frees Emily, who tries to get Rosin to run away with her together. But Rosin refuses, knowing that sooner or later, Henley's debtors are going to show up and find him dead. And if they're together, they'll both be arrested for Henley's death. So she tells Emily to flee to Valpurgis, where the other witches are. And Emily promises that she will come back for Rosin. Then she flees. To give Emily more time, Rosin doesn't attempt to flee, and she begins lying about the murder, declaring her innocence because it's drawing all the attention to her, so no one thinks about the other person who is living in the home with them. Rosin asks Yearn how it feels. Like, how does it feel to know that I've been lying to you this entire time? And Yearn says it's fine, but Rosin doesn't believe him. She realizes that instead of the clean ending she was hoping for, where she just disappears and he forgets about her, now she told him the truth because she has fallen in love with him. And he tells her again, like, none of it matters. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You served your time. From 17 to 25, that's 8 years. That's the minimum sentence for murder. You're free to go, as far as I'm concerned. Rosin is stunned. Anne just starts loading stuff into the lifeboat, and she realizes, like, he's prepared all this stuff for me to run away successfully. And she, conflicted, she's like, no one will ever forgive you for this. You will be ruined for me. And he responds, like, I've been crazy this whole time anyways. It's nothing. And he says, like, he always told her it didn't matter because he knew she wouldn't believe him if he said that he liked her. And he hopes that her lies last for eternity, that, like, they become the truth of her life. And so he starts lowering her lifeboat into the water and tells her that he loves her. And she promises, like, we will meet again. And then she boats off into the distance with all the sea monsters. And oh my God, too much, man. Oh, if I tell you, I cry every time I read this comment. I've read it like 3 times already. Oh my gosh. There are some epilogue chapters which go on to show that the story is kind of that she bewitched everyone on the ship, and nobody wants to admit really that it was Ian who did it, because again, he is a war hero. The people love him because of like what he symbolizes, but everyone else in the military is like, F that guy, he sucks. We need to get rid of him. They decide to exile him. And the Empress, who is revealed to have been one of his military school classmates, lets him choose where he wants to go. And so he chooses this remote island near the Isle of Monte. And so he goes, he's given a house, he's living on the island for over a year. He starts having these dreams about Rosen where he's like talking to her, but he can't tell if she hears him, and then they mess around. But he thinks it's just a dream. And finally, after about a year, these kids show up and they're like, oh, these women were asking where you live. And he's like, what women? And they're like, one of them was blonde. I don't know. We've never seen him before. Did they come on the ship that just arrived? And Ian realizes like it's Rosen and presumably Emily. And so he like runs around the island trying to find them to no avail until he goes home and he is like, I'm just going to go back to sleep. I'm used to the heartbreak. When Rosen embraces him from behind and he's like, if this is a dream, please just leave me alone. Like, I can't deal with the heartbreak anymore. And she's like, what do you mean? So it's really Rosen. She really showed up, and it's revealed that because she's a novice witch, she can only leave the island for one night at a time, and she has to be escorted by like a senior witch. So Emily takes her like once a month to go see Ian. I think there's like 4 or 5 like epilogue chapters, and in one of them, Rosen gives him matching rings with part of a magical creature in it, so it looks like a little opal. And then he reveals like he also got the matching rings, so they're wearing each other, like they're both wearing 2 rings that they got each other, and it's so cute, guys. Oh my gosh. Oh, so here's my review. Basically, this comic hits every single trope I love. It's terrible. And it's like the yearning was just like impeccable. So in terms of the art, I really love the art style. Very expressive. Bonus, it's consistent throughout the whole comic. A lot of comics you can definitely see the art style change over time. Not the case with this one. I actually liked the like comic relief panels. A lot of time the like chibi style is just so disparate from the real style that it kind of feels like they're not even by the same person, but this felt like a genuine miniaturization of this person's style. So I really appreciated that. And it made the comic relief just perfect. As for the story, so I did look around since this is based off of a web novel. Apparently it is extremely accurate to the original story with like one big twist. So in the comic, Emily is Hindley's daughter. In the web novel, Emily is actually Hindley's first wife. And so the pregnancy storyline is more of Emily's story. Like she desperately wants to have a child, you know, despite the fact the father would be Hindley. She just desperately wants a child. And so she is suffering through miscarriages. If I remember correctly, it had to do with like witches not being able to have children really. And so just can't keep a pregnancy. Then we have the scene where Rosen realizes she's pregnant and terminates the pregnancy with Emily's help. And so in the book, it's double guilt. Rosen knows that Emily wants a child so badly, but Emily's still willing to help her despite that because she knows what having that child would mean. And that's actually the point at which Emily decides none of this is worth it. Like, let's just run away. Other than that, I didn't notice anything different with the webcomic compared to the web novel, which is a plus. A lot of the times the webcomics are like drastically different than the web novel, which is disappointing. Like sometimes they'll change the ending completely and it's like, why did you even adapt this if you weren't going to stay true to the story? Overall, 10 out of 10, 5 million stars. I'm obsessed with this comic. I still really recommend going to read it because I did leave out some like flashback sequences And obviously their banter is like the best part. If you've been reading the screenshots, then you kind of have a glimpse into them, but I really recommend going to read it. I just finished reading A Dark and Drowning Tide by Allison Saft, I believe. And it definitely is like a great example of yearning. The yearn was the best part of the book. The plot I thought was kind of shaky and some of the descriptions needed help, but I am still like looking for a book that has like really great yearning like this comic, but also has a solid storyline that I like. I don't know why it's so difficult. I never seem to find books that fit that very well, but lots of webcomics. Who knows why? Well, that is all for now. I will see you next time.